Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 40k Fireside podcast. I'm David Gaylard, and I'm joined by my good friend Vijay. Together, we discuss 40k and the meta from our perspective, along with events we've recently been to and those that have got coming up. So come on down to the fireside and listen.
Welcome back, everyone, to episode 20 of Fireside 40k. You're joined by me and Dave, and we've got you today to talk about the balanced data slate and also the London Open, which we just attended. We're going to kind of focus more on the balanced data slate and the future, because I think that's what people are mostly interested in, but London Open was interesting as well. And, me and Dave have some stories to share. Dave has his stuff, and I have my journey with my Eldar as well.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah.
So that's what we're going to cover today, guys. We'll just go straight into it, I think. Vic, you bring Eldari. I bring Guard with the Earthshakers. Kind of covered that in the last episode. How was your day one?
So I had a really good tournament overall because I've been tweaking this Eldar list, developing it, trying to counter things in the meta, and I was lucky enough to play through a number of really good players. Zach sent me a message. I had like the highest strength of schedule, which is the difficulty of opponents you face.
Mm-hmm.
And that's perfect for a tournament like this, where you want to try and play against the best people to get a good challenge. I started off with Orcs. That was a nice, comfortable matchup. I had a few practice games into that already, so I knew what I was doing. And then it started getting more interesting. So I played Adam Lane on his Space Wolves. We've got a member of our team called Chris Radford, who's a big Space Wolf player. I practiced against him a lot. And so I knew the flow of that game, managed to beat the Space Wolves despite the Desolation Marines. It was all fine.
Yep.
It got even more spicy after that because then I ran into Alex Harrison, one of the best players in the country, in the world. And he was playing a very very interesting Iron Hands list. It was kind of the on-meta list, just with two Invictor war suits.
Two Invictors or three?
It was two Invictors instead of the two Infiltrator units, basically.
Yeah, that's right.
It was really interesting. He went first, which gave him some momentum. But we basically played a back and forth game through that where, whatever pieces we exposed were dying. And then eventually he just ran out of the resources a little bit before me. There were a few moments where kind of things swang a little bit in my way and at the key moment, and then the rest of it was all average. So I got the advantage there and I was able to take a fairly big win on that, which was not reflective of how tight the game really was.
Yeah.
And I think Eldar and Iron Hands, Eldar are really good into Iron Hands, actually. I think they have a very 50-50 match into there.
Well, you had the double Night Spinner, double Starweaver, and the Urolith as well, right? Which are all like pretty good at killing Marines, I would assume, yeah?
Yeah, the whole army is good at killing Marines if you can see them and if you can survive. Like if you can keep your resources alive for long enough, you can end up with turns where if they expose too much, you can really pick up large chunks of their army. So managed a really good game into Alex Harrison. I felt like the room was not expecting me to win that game, and everyone was really happy after I won it.
I mean, your list is really tricky to get to actually engage into and interact with, right? So I think a lot of people don't appreciate that when they see the list. It's like, well, you need to take some pretty extreme angles and get really close to actually hit the stuff that is really dealing you the damage. Otherwise, it's out of line of sight from the Night Spinners, right?
Exactly. As long as you're like a turn ahead in your mind, you're like, okay, I've got this bit blocked out with my precious resource. I'm going to put it over there. Yeah. I've kind of slowed down this bit, so I know he's going to attack from this middle bit. Or he's going to approach there, and I have to make sure I have the units ready to counterattack that point.
Yeah.
I think if you are a little bit ahead, you can control kind of the pacing and the direction the game goes.
Yeah.
And make sure you tilt it to your favor.
Yeah, you kind of have to have your own very strong game plan where you can kind of bully the Eldari player into like, oh, actually, you got to come to me and you got to come play my game a little bit. Whereas like if you're just kind of doing stuff and you're not pushing the Eldari player around, like they get to position everything perfectly and then they just get to, not interact with you and take off your models and stuff. And yeah, it's a really tough position.
Exactly. Once you start scraping off their resources without losing your own, it can really spiral out of control against Eldar. And people are starting to pay more attention to the Eldar. I had a lot of people come up to me and say, who was it? Danny Eversons came up to me, Vic, I've tried your list yesterday. It was really, really good in practice. And people are paying attention to the Eldar now. I think they may be better than people had predicted.
I don't know why they wouldn't like it. Super strong, man. Really strong. And notably, I think, as we'll chat later, only got stronger after the balanced data slate, right?
Well, definitely didn't get weaker, and that, in a way, is a strength.
Exactly.
So, after this, I got my pairing and went back to the hotel room. I saw it, and I was like, "Oh, I've got the list which I'm expecting I won't be able to handle," which was the 45 Deathwing Terminators. He'd just beaten Chris on his Iron Hands, and he'd gone through Conrad, who was playing as Eldar, and now it was my turn to face it. And I think most people had signed me off for this game because it was also on
You had
Tide of
signed yourself
Conviction.
off, to be fair.
I mean, it's a whole 6 objective mission on Dawn of War against 45 Deathwing Terminators. It's about the worst possible combination of things that can happen. And in my list, I predicted that people would reduce Deathwing Terminators and increase Desolation Marines. So I'd kind of taken out 2D cannons from my list. I've taken out the Mortal Wound Warlord trait on my Fireside, so I'd reduce the overall output into Terminators. But what actually happened in this game is that the power of that Death Jester to move 22 inches and pick up Dark Angel's characters, when it goes right, it's a little bit swingy. But I learned a little trick. I learned that you can use Blade Storm, which is the exploding 6s on shuriken weapons, on the Death Jester's gun.
You get
It's a
exploding
shuriken
fours,
gun.
is it?
Yeah, 4 exploding hits on any 6 to hit.
Yeah.
And actually that really helps the maths on picking up these Deathwing characters. So I was like shooting my Starweaver up. I picked up his Apothecary turn 1, his Chaplain turn 2, the Ravenwing Champion turn 3.
Oh my word.
So
The
he
Death
went
Jester was on a
he went
spree.
through all the
Multi-kill.
characters.
Oh dear.
And then
triple kill with the sniper.
I got a bit lucky because I had kind of planned the strategy to attack one flank, and my opponent had actually gotten light on the flank that I wanted to attack. So I only had to deal with 10 Terminators on this one flank, and I just phantasmed my whole army onto that side, killed these 10 Terminators, and essentially just killed the army 10 Terminators at a time.
Yeah.
I ended up with having only lost maybe 200, 300 points of my army by the end of this, and I'd killed 44 of his Terminators by the end of the game. So that was a really nice win, and
that's exactly what happens if you don't have the reach and the speed to interact with the Eldar army. Like against a world-class player like you, Vic, you're just going to get toyed around the board, 17.1 inches or 16 inches if you hit a 12, something like that, right? Like it's just not going to be. You're just not going to ever have your foot in the game, really, are you? Unless you try and play the entire board at the same time, right? And is that kind of what you like? Because I know you said you wrote yourself off. I was like, what is the lose condition there? Is it if they play the entire board at the same time, or if they know ahead of time, like I would know playing against you, is that you would try and hit the flank with your big L in that position, right? I'm assuming that's what
you see, right? It's counterintuitive. You know where the big L is?
Yeah.
Is the incorrect flank.
You want to put everything on the other side of the army.
On the opposite side of it, because of the way the objectives are.
Precisely.
So yeah, it's a really counterintuitive game, the strategy on that one. And it's the opposite of what you think. I had nothing in my big L except for one Night Spinner.
Yeah.
And on the other side of the board, I had my entire army, both Phoenix Lords, all the D cannons, everything.
Of course. And then you hope that they deploy only a little bit to match your little bit on that side, and then you phantasm everything over to that side, and then all of a sudden you have the diagonal version of the armies against each other, right? Which is the longest deployment possible.
Exactly, and you're using speed, right? That's the only massive strength this Eldar army has, is just the immense speed. So if you can utilize that, it felt good, man. It felt good.
Pro tips, man, because I know you talk a lot about flanks and kind of board space and board control, which is something that I've picked up on a lot, and I've tried to take a little bit off you, the way that you look at the game like that. So that's a huge way of looking at the game, especially when you play an army like Eldar. Like, not every army gets to express itself and take advantage of that because of the way that it doesn't have the speed or the fly or the infantry. But look, if you are trying to pick up this list, that's a huge way. I've seen you play that for like the longest time, right?
Yeah, exactly. And TTS is quite good for this because TTS lets you put these big circles around units. And it's really interesting when you put in the 9-inch deep strike circle around units and you see the kind of areas that you can screen out. The next level of development is to see the areas that units can threaten. And those circles can be really powerful, just to see like, okay, this Terminator unit can move 17 inches. Put that circle out and see how far that Terminator unit can actually express its control. And both as the player who's using that unit can understand how much threat they can express, and also the defensive player who knows the areas of the board which they're allowed to go into.
Good idea.
looking at the game as space really can help you develop as a player.
I'm going to steal that. I'm going to do that in my next game.
Yeah, just see where the circles go, and there'll be gaps in the circles which you kind of play through,
Yeah.
which will be quite interesting.
And
But yeah,
that also must help you stage as well at the same time, right? Like understanding what your threat zones are exactly, and okay, I'm going to need to actually get to this point in the board to hit the point that I eventually want to get to, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah, it
Nice.
keeps going more and more advanced from there. But let's not like go too deep into that rabbit hole. But yeah, I then ended up losing my next game against a player called Clement. And Clement lives in London. He's a new member of Dice Down. He's been playing with those guys loads, and he was playing Yanari.
Mhm.
And I have a little bit of list advantage in this particular matchup. So he was playing down on list advantage because actually the way he engages me with melee units is very difficult into my kind of list. It's quite challenging for him to actually throw melee units in without them kind of either my units falling back from them, getting wire weaved, or things
Mm.
like that. So he got first turn, which was a nice advantage for him. As soon as he gets first turn, it becomes him doing primary denial to me. That's always how Eldar goes. And me actually just trying to hold on till the end of the game and win on points. And we got to the end of the game. He's pretty much tabled. He's got like a small handful of models left. And I have like 3 win conditions here. And on the last round of the game, I saw each of those win conditions fall apart. Like I saw one Harlequin troop survive, so he can plant a bomb. That's a swing. So if that doesn't happen, he loses. And then I saw him hit a 3 mortal wounds on a smite with Bahara through my deny. If that doesn't happen, and then I fail my 4-up to get up. If that doesn't happen, I plant a bomb and I win the game.
Yeah.
And then he has 1 wound left on a warlock, and I've got my entire shooting phase into this warlock. And I make him take 8 saves, and he passes all of them. If he fails one of those saves, I win the game. So I ended up losing by 2 points here, and it was like a really awesome game because it was so close, and those are the nail biters that you want. Unfortunately, it didn't go my way that time. I don't care; it's fine.
Yeah, sometimes you can't control the way the dice go in
Yeah,
situations, right?
exactly, and it's quite exciting. You know, the adrenaline goes up. It's like the gambling inside you starts going, and it was pretty wild.
For me,
Clement
it's
was
just the
so
depression
happy.
goes up, and my opponent just continually makes saves. I'm like, oh dear.
No, another one. Because when they make the first one, you have so much hope, and you're like, oh, they
It'll
passed it,
balance
so
up.
what? It's fine.
Yeah.
But it's when they make the 8th one, and you're just like, oh
Just like, oh
no.
mate, come on. Good
So
times.
that was my tournament. I went 4-1, decent score, and yeah, the Eldar still going strong.
Still crushing it. I was so I went 2-1, and I'll talk about this in a bit. So I was playing the triple Earthshaker list. They were actually pretty good in the matchups I was hoping they would be good in. So I think round 1 I played against I think I played against Custodes round 1. And the Earthshakers were actually super good there because just AP4 damage 2 was like miles better than Mortars. So I think I won that one 100 points, and actually the 5-up to hit automatically wound is super good on the Earthshakers.
Nice.
You just crank that, and then just like every 5's automatically wound. So it's like it's very good. So it's good into armies that actually have to take armor saves, for example. But like Invan armies like Aldaria, don't really think it's that good into. But obviously, going into this, we're preparing for those final games where it's probably going to be some variant of Space Marines, right?
Yeah, exactly. You've teched for it. It's and also I love this tech choice that you made to make it 3 units, 1 unit of 3 rather than 3 units of 1.
Yeah,
very, very clever.
yeah. And I was also playing the Laurels of Commandment too, so I could put them all in cover as well.
Nice.
So then round 2, I played. Okay, I'm really sorry. I played something round 2, and I got 100 points.
Okay. All right.
So it's off to a good start. And then round 3, I played a guy called Will Whitaker, who I've played twice. Super lovely guy, a good player, and his brother's a very good player as well. Kind of 2 staples of the London scene. They don't travel necessarily to all the big tournaments, but really good players actually. And he was on Mono Zench Demons, and like I think out of all the lists in the field, this was probably the one, given the tech choices I'd made in my list, that I really just didn't want to hit. Like, I didn't know it at the time, but like this list is actually some people struggle against Modern Zinch Demons with Guard, but I think my list that I won Southampton with would have been very good into it because I had 30 Cassican, 40 troops, more Russes, and it just would have been a better time overall. But this list with the Earthshakers, you know, I sacrificed a lot to basically have a lot of dead weight. So prior to the game, because of the tournament format, I made the decision in my head to look for 15s because I wanted to score 100 points because I just believed in my head that if I won with like an 85 or an 87 or something, that I pretty much just wouldn't make the top two. And this kind of contextualizes a lot with what I'll probably talk about in the next 5 or 10 minutes. But for me, that's a huge part of the tournament. You know, I play a lot of Warhammer, and to be honest with you, this tournament is a pretty small tournament. It's 150 players. It's just a major, and for me, it's kind of like, well, you know, I might as well take my crack at the top two if I'm going to take my crack at the top two. And having that mindset means that you are going to be taking more risks in the game to score more points, and that's just the reality, right, Vic?
Yeah, it depends on your mentality with it,
For
and
sure.
I think like I have definitely done that where I've gone into a game and see like, okay, like I have advantage here. I'm going to push it and go for a slightly worse secondary where I know I can cap it out if I table my opponent. And sometimes you have to do that in the UKTC tournaments to hit the cut,
Yep.
which is a bit of a pain if it
Yeah.
goes wrong.
Yeah, so you know, maybe if it was if I was a younger version of myself, if I hadn't maybe won tournaments something, then you know it wouldn't be I wouldn't have made that decision. But the reality is that like we play this game tons. Getting for me personally, getting fifth or sixth or seventh or you know fourth in tournament this size is like it's not really something that I'm going for. I would rather at this point in my Warhammer journey, I would rather try and play for the wins and play for the wins. Well, yeah. So that's just whatever your philosophy on the tournament is going into it. Whatever you want to achieve going into it. That's your own personal goal. So you know you define yourself through your tournament, through with what you want to get out of it, and which is a huge part about Warhammer, and actually is what makes the game so great. So anyway, I took Assassinate. Now, this would have been okay, but what happens is I actually go first. I get a good Cassican bomb off turn one. I take off some threats. Scout Sentinels go first and shoot and get into combat. Give Will a nice sort of take back to make sure there's no units within an inch and stuff like that because that's where I want to play. And the big thing about the Earthshakers here is that the demons have the 3 Warp Storm point -1 to hit outside 12 inches, and if you're playing Earthshakers and you're shooting through dense terrain, you're effectively shooting through -2, which means that you would hit on 6s. Now, fortunately, the stratagem is unmodified 5s to hit, which, as we chatted about in our team before earlier, and I explained to Will, actually works because my unmodified hit roll is still a 5. So -2 doesn't screw me over there because I can still use the stratagem to be auto-wounding on 5s, which is nice. But the problem is Will's entire army saves against me on 3s. And if you've played against this list before, you'll probably appreciate the fact that it's a little bit frustrating, especially if you're playing maybe an army that is sort of monophasic like Guard. And guys, just from turn 2 onwards, like, man, Will saves were just like 90% 3-ups for like the next 3 turns straight. And I was just like, oh my God, so brutal. So I think the game, and then, I mean, and then so turn 3 comes around and then I put 4 rerolls to hit on my KD command squad, fixed bayonets. And I get into a lot of his characters, like his Exalted Flamers and stuff like that. 0 wounds out of all my attacks. I'm like, okay. So that would have got me, if I killed, so the score was 86-82. If I had killed 1 character, obviously it would have been a 1 point, and then if I just had boots on the ground somewhere else, then it would have been a draw. If I'd taken R&D, I would have scored +5 points, so I would have gone 87-86 to me, which would have obviously changed the way the game played out as well. So I would have had a higher boot score, and I would have had just +5 points. So that would have just been the straight up draw. And if you've listened to me talk about Guard before, you know the decision is basically always between banners, R&D, and then sometimes in these edge cases, like the game we played, assassinate for a 15 for a 100-point score. So those both would have lived it. Those both would have got me the win. And then there was I think another, like you, Vic, another 3 points in the game where For example, on the last turn, 11 saves into one flamer on the home objective for just a straight up 4, which should have just been a draw.
No.
Past all 11. It's like, oh my god. But look, it's a great game, and it's like there are things that you can't do in the game. Things that you can always play the game better and make decisions better. But there's some things that are just out of your control at the end of the day, and it's important just to not be like, oh, I didn't win, etc. When the reality is that sometimes, you can play. I'm not saying I did this, but you can play a perfect game and still lose, and which is the moral behind that story is that there are things that are out of your control, right?
Yeah,
That you can't really control.
I think one very healthy way of looking at it is that you are much more likely not to win a tournament than you are to win a tournament. And in order to win a tournament, you actually need a string of multiple lucky things to happen.
For sure.
So, if you have a tournament win rate, let's say, of you win 1 in every 5 of your tournaments, I think you'll be one of the most elite players in the world at that level. And that you got to keep that in mind. The tournament win rate is 20%. You're trying to hit a 6 on a D6 every time you go to a tournament to try and win it. And if you just keep a healthy mentality like that, it puts things in perspective for you.
Yeah. So I'm going to segue there on healthy mentality. So what I did was I dropped because I thought to myself, well, I'll go into this in a second. So I dropped and didn't play day 2. Now this is a London tournament, so I lived in London. My house is about an hour away from the venue, and I heard a few people chat about me dropping, so I just kind of wanted to address this because I think it's very easy to have some of these instantaneous reactions to someone dropping from a tournament, and I really don't think some of them are fair. For context, the amount that Vic and I play Warhammer, think about Warhammer, contribute to the community through the podcast or chatting with people on Discord or helping people out, chatting with our team, organizing the team, is an obsessive amount. It's not healthy, and me personally, I've improved that a little bit from last year. I've improved it quite a lot from last year, but it's still something that is all consuming for the most part. Wouldn't you agree, Vic?
Yeah, it takes up a lot of time. It's a very, it's a big part of our lives, isn't it?
Yeah. So the way that I like to think about it is that if there's an opportunity where I can get back some time from Warhammer to spend with my family, catching up on work, relaxing, working on my mental health, going to the gym, that's an opportunity I should always seriously consider. So the decision I made to drop was basically, I can go home, which I'll get home at 10:30 at night, and then I got to wake up at 7:30 to get to the venue. So I'm not operating on a great amount of sleep to stress out and play all day, or I can sleep in, hang out with my fiance, have everyone around for a barbecue, have all our neighbors and community around for a barbecue, and have a good time. And that's the decision I ended up making because we seldom get those opportunities in Warhammer, and for me, I just like to look at it in terms of a cost and investment standpoint, and you got to be honest with yourself sometimes. Like, is the cost investment worth it to play this tournament at this point? And the reason why I say that is because we've all got different goals when we walk into a tournament, and my goal was to win the tournament or place very well. Now I can play Warhammer against the best players in the world any time of the week, and that's a luxury that I have. So perhaps playing another 2 rounds of a tournament is not as important to me. That doesn't mean that I don't enjoy the game. Obviously, I enjoy the game for the beauty of the game's sake, and I've said that a lot on many different podcasts, is that, I'm not a huge person on fluff or lore or maybe necessarily painting, because for me, the game is the game's sake, and it's a beautiful game, and we could be playing with bottle caps for all I care. I would still turn up and play a tournament for that. So I do get a lot of enjoyment out of the tournament. I don't think dropping from a tournament for reasons to maybe benefit or, make healthy life decisions is a bad thing at all. And I don't think it's appropriate to maybe criticize players that take the opportunity to do so as well, despite what you may think if you've traveled down for an event to play the whole tournament. Because the reality is that we all engage in Warhammer and the community and the tournament scene in our individual ways. And it's a little bit dismissive to say, oh, you should have stayed to play the whole tournament and it's unsporting, because the reality is that you engage in the tournament in a much different way from which everyone else does, and maybe different from the way that I engage it, for example. Anyway, Rant over.
That's fine. You do you, man. I think everyone has to enjoy this hobby in their own way, and it's a hobby. That's the
Yeah.
key thing we always have to remember. So, yeah, fair play, Dave. And I have definitely done that as well, especially when I'm close to home, when I can easily get home.
Yeah, exactly
That's
right.
that's the big thing. So, yeah,
All right,
fair
rant
play, man.
over. Boom.
Let's do it. Let's move on.
Jazz
We got
time.
this.
Part 2 coming up. We're going to be going over balanced data slate. Here we go. All the hottest takes.
Okay, guys, we are back for a little bit on the balanced data slate. So this has been out for a week, so we've had time to digest it. We're going to give you our hot takes, starting with the things that we feel are most impactful into the meta. And I'm going to hit it off, Dave, with the one that I like the most, and that is the Dark Angels nerf.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I know there's some slightly mixed opinions because this is a little bit of a sledgehammer. So it's an elegant sledgehammer because it goes after one particular thing very aggressively.
Yeah.
And in this case, they have removed the transhuman, so the only wound on 4s against the Deathwing side of things, so the inner circle Deathwing stuff. This means that the Deathwing Terminators are much less survivable. That's the one. So they have multiple layers of survivability across Dark Angels. One of the most important ones was this transhuman ability. It means a lot more wounds go through onto the Terminators and they have to take saves. The lethality of the game is such that you can't really run armies of 45 Terminators without expecting a lot of the top armies with high output to be able to actually clear them very, very easily. So I would say that this drastically changes the meta and how common it will be for us to see Dark Angels played on the top tables. I don't know what you think, Dave.
So, just as you were saying that, I was thinking to myself, David, be honest, because I'm just trying to think about what I said when Leviathan Tyranid Warriors got nerfed, right? So to me, it's really similar. The army has gone from, well, they both are transhuman, but the army has gone from very good at dominant to basically never existing, right? And I think back at the time, I would have probably also said it's not a good way of balancing the game because you've taken something which has a viable archetype and you've actually just completely obliterated that from the game. Like Inner Circle now does.
It can't fail morale, you can't fall back.
Oh, right. So it's 50% of it is negative.
But fluffy, man. Fluffy.
So overall, I think it's a healthy change for the game because the sheer, the dullness, I think, of that data sheet was quite prevalent, and everyone was getting a little bit bored of it. But I don't think that maybe that was the right way. I would have liked to have seen them create a way where we could have still seen the Dark Angels list, perform with Ravenwing Dark Angels, but it just had less stuff, right? So, like, why weren't we looking at maybe just putting up the points for some of that thing, or to say for example, why don't you attach on Inner Circle 5 points per model upgrade to get transhuman? Would that be right?
The key thing is the design philosophy for the balanced data slates, and this one in particular, is that they have not made points changes.
Yeah.
In this case, Dark Angels really needed points changes on the Terminators.
Yeah.
So I think as an alternative to that, they've kind of gone for this as their approach, which corrects the list because I think Dark Angels still are good.
Yeah.
I don't think the army is dead. I think the army has a lot of depth. The Ravenwing side is still completely intact.
Yep.
And you can make a very coherent army without it being oppressive as it is at the moment.
Yeah.
So I'll give a thumbs up to this change. I think there is still use for Deathwing Terminators at 33 points per model. I think they're still a good unit, but they're not oppressive when they're spammed.
They're just normal Terminators now, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, even better than normal Terminators. They're still very good. At 33 points is cheap, I think.
Is that cheaper than a normal Terminator?
Is it not?
I'm assuming they're all I think they're all pointed around 33.
Are they all the same?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, for example, I just don't think they're differentiated from any other Terminator now, which, considering that they're a standalone datasheet, probably doesn't make that much sense, right? Like, they are called Deathwing Terminators, right? Like, you don't get access to that in Ultramarines, for example, right?
Got it. Yeah.
But look, it's small, like, that's just a small overarching thing, I think, right? Is that, like, I don't like when they nuke things into oblivion to not be unplayable. Because I think the more that they do that, like they've just taken out an army that could have been balanced, if you know what I mean. And it's
Mhm.
like, well, a part of balancing the game in general is to keep armies that are competitive in the game, not just like removing those consistently.
So, Dave, I have a question for you. In the middle of the game, like, what do you think is the most middle army in the game?
Oh, the most. Oh,
The most in the bang in the middle.
man. What? Okay, okay, okay. What do you mean by okay? First of all, what do you mean by middle of the army, and in relation to like a tournament performance, for example?
Um, as in, you could win a tournament if you if you play really well with it, but it's it's unlikely to win against the very best of the meta.
Hmm. Uh, I
Like, what
think
would you say is your peak perfect kind of competitive balance
I think
faction?
at the moment, okay, I think Thousand Suns are up there, for example. I
Hmm.
think Chaos Knights are probably up there. Um,
Nice, nice.
is
Yes, I like it.
Imperial Knights maybe? You know, I mean,
Mm.
it's easy because they're such a straightforward and simple army, right?
Mm.
Um, Something like some of the Marine chapters, for example, that are a little bit more down there.
Hmm.
Is Adeptus Mechanicus one of those armies right now?
I'd
Arguably
like
right.
maybe a little bit under it.
A little bit under, sure.
Mm.
Those kind of armies. So,
Got it. Yeah, okay, got
how
it.
is that leading on to your next question, though?
So, my question is, are Dark Angels above that level now after this change or below it?
So in the if you played the same current build,
No, like anything. You can make anything out of Dark
oh,
Angels.
yeah, I would say still above it, yeah, because the
Still
Raven
above
Wing
it.
side is you've still got access to, of course.
So what they've done is they've corrected a very oppressive, unfun part of the army
Hmm.
without ruining Dark Angels, and
Yep.
I'm giving them a thumbs up for that one.
Okay, I'm still giving them a thumbs up. Don't get me wrong. My thumb is it's just edge. It's just angular. It's like northwest right now. No, but look, I think your little thought experiment there just beautifully identified the fact that actually there are other ways of playing the game. So you set me up for a nice trap there live on air. So
Reveal my
props
trap
to you.
card.
That was quite good actually. Unscripted, yes. Do you want to take the next one? Desolation
Oh
Marines,
my god,
which
you wanted me to rant, eh?
yeah,
Okay.
just but so guys, we have notes that we kind of like loosely follow and stuff like that. So we've got a
Yes.
list of stuff to talk through. But
I've got an order of most impactful to least
yes, but
impactful.
Desolation Marines didn't get touched, so I'm wondering why you quoted that.
So I think this is impactful for my mental health because what happened was I watched this video that the balance team put up on that Warhammer community post,
Okay.
and they identified in that they said the words "Desolation Marines are a problem,"
Hmm.
right? So how much hope that brings into my life. They understand that they're a problem,
Hmm.
and they did nothing, Dave.
Yeah, because if they mention that something's too strong, their only approach is the sledgehammer approach, as we've just seen. So you were
But
expecting the sledgehammer, right?
how did they literally not make a single change to it? And what I think has happened here is they they did make a change to Codex Warfare.
Mm-hmm. They
So
did.
yeah, so Codex Warfare is changed now, so you can only score a maximum of 5 VP per doctrine, which is a change, and I think it does make it less effective here. You really need to build around it to run that.
Yeah.
Let's just say that's not going to be taken very often. Um, but that is not a direct change to the power of Desolation Marines,
You'll
in my
give
opinion.
I'm just waiting to just butt in with the "I told you so" moment here, right?
Oh, I can't believe it because no, I would have accepted the "I told you so" if they didn't identify them as a problem themselves. Like
uh,
I would have gone for okay, they know it's a problem, but they don't want to change it because they've just released it and all this
hmm.
stuff. But why would you say they're a problem in your video and then not do anything about it?
I agree, but I think the larger "I told you so" is in the previous episode. You said the problem with Desolation Marines wasn't Desolation Marines, and actually they were perfectly balanced considering the
Mhm.
points cost. It was Codex Warfare that's the problem. And
No,
actually,
it
no, no,
wasn't
no, you
Codex
definitely
Warfare.
said this. No,
It
you did.
wasn't.
No, you.
I deny
No,
this.
okay.
We
Someone
need
in
to
the
get
comment. Look. Okay, we've
okay.
never asked someone to do work for us, but someone in the comments, one of the other episodes where we talked about Desolation Marines, I remember you saying that points wise, they're actually quite fairly points costed it, but it was the context of Codex Warfare in which they were too powerful.
Yes, okay, I accept. I did say the Codex Warfare is a problem, but I think the underlying and major problem is the way that they interact with the Devastator devastator doctrine.
Yes.
And I think the elegant, correct fix to this was making it so that you can't pick your doctrine for the entire game, and you can't stay in Devastator doctrine for the entire game.
Yep, for sure.
That immediately corrects Desolation Marines,
Yeah.
immediately corrects Codex Warfare, and that's all they would have had to
Raven
do.
Guard as well. Raven Wing, sorry.
And we would have been in a happy place.
Yeah,
But...
look, I certainly agree. You're right, and I think if little check here, guys, a little bit of insight knowledge into our team is that some of our players were rather happy with the balanced data slate, provided that their army, i.e. Iron Hands, didn't really get nerfed that much at all. So I think Desolation Marines are still going to be quite prevalent, and I think 10 to 15 is going to be a very standardized backbone of playing any Marine army going forward, isn't it, really? Despite Codex Warfare being changed or not.
Yeah, 100%. So Desolation Marines are going to be a menace. And the problem is the Desolation Marines mean that we have an indirect meta, or at least a meta with a lot of indirect fire until the end of the 9th edition, sure. Which is the life we're living now. I was hoping that wouldn't be the case and we'd have a nice varied meta in the run-up, but not meant to be.
It's a little bit of a shame, isn't it? But, they got to sell those models.
Well, the thing is, they're not even selling the models individually. It's just out of the box, so it's only coming out secondhand.
Well, they got to sell the entire box. You got to buy the entire box to get Desolation Marines, right? That's even better. It's better than Kasrkin that you could just buy. Look, I think if Kasrkin were any way to go by, we're looking at probably like 2 months of playtime with Desolation Marines in their current format, which would put us right around 10th edition, of course, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of Kasrkin, Dave, do you want to take a bit of Astra Militarum changes?
Yeah, great segue. So I think they only had 2 changes, right? One was to Kasrkin, so capped at 6 now, guys. So that's great. And on this one, so Kasrkin are still really powerful. They for 100 points, and they can do a secondary, and you can actually order them for action and shoot, which if you take R&D is like quite good. So I think Kasrkin are still really good. I think you still want to play minimum 20 if you're going to be playing Guard. 1 in Mechanized, 1 in Barbican Key. And actually 1 from Outflank is still probably good now, because the weapon loadout you're going to take is going to change a little bit, I think. You might want to consider taking, on your Barbican Key unit, you might want to take 2 Melters and 2 Plasma, and then take the rest be Hotshot Volleys. Because ideally what you probably want to do now is split all your hot shots into 1 target to get the 6 mortals, because you need about 9 shots for that. And then you've got 4 other guns that could split somewhere else. So that's a really interesting change. Well, I think it's a good change. It's kind of the one we all expected, right? So I think Kasrkin is still good. If you've bought them and you've got their models, you shouldn't feel too out of pocket. There's still going to be a key way of playing Guard. However, the other change they made, which, look, I'll be honest with you, I don't think this is a good change, was the Finial of Nomradesh, or whatever it's called, but everyone calls it Finial.
Oh, yeah, this is a bad change.
My friend Finn. So what they did is they removed the ignore ballistic skill modifier as part of the Finial. Now, a lot of people, when they look at the Finial, probably go, wow, you can't ignore damage. That's insanely good, X, Y, and Z. It gets through phase cap, -1 damage. The reality is, guys, that the ignore ballistic skill modifier was 80% of the power of the Finial. Now, the reason that is because in the meta right now, we actually don't have a lot of Feel No Pain, phase cap, maybe Bloodthirster, but, Guard are pretty good against the Bloodthirster with Remain Vigilant. And then we don't have a lot of minus damage. And and on top of that, Guard are a base ballistic skill 4 army, especially on the tanks, but they do get +1 to hit, and you can take aim other platforms to be ballistic skill 3. But as soon as you go through a dense, or they're -1 to hit, or maybe if they've got Transhitman, your damage falls off significantly. So the Finial nerf should not be understated. I think it's really big for the army. It'll really reduce the output that the army has.
I genuinely had exactly the opposite opinion of you until you explained it to me just then, because we haven't talked about this.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, I thought the ignoring phase caps was and damage reduction and feel no pains was the more powerful part of this relic, compared to ignoring hit and wound modifiers.
Yeah.
And I find it fascinating the way you've just explained that.
Well,
And
for example, mortars, right? Mortars
Mhm.
now hit on fives a lot of the time because either A, you're moving, or B, you're shooting over dents. And UKTC in the corner missions, you're shooting over dents very often. So if your mortars hitting on fives instead of fours is huge to begin with, right?
hmm Yeah, fair enough. Okay, yeah, so
Sentinels,
maybe
they take it as well. Kassakin, they moving with the heavy weapons. Your guardsmen coming in from reserve move with the heavy weapons. A lot of that
so.
is really important.
Would you still run this relic, Dave?
I would not run the Finial. If I was submitting for a
Oh,
tournament tomorrow, I don't think I
hmm
would play Finial. And I don't know how many games it would come up, to be honest. If it was
fair
just
enough.
ignore, feel no pain, -1 damage, would it come
Yeah,
up that often? No, probably not, right?
better paint up that fourth Phoenix Lord. Here we go.
But how many times do I get to just shoot a Phoenix Lord, right? It doesn't happen that often.
Very true.
What I would take though is I was really impressed with the relic. It's a relic sword upgrade you can take. It's 3 additional attacks and +1 to wound, and then you get strength 6, strength +2, or it's like strength +3, -2, flat 2. And if you take the warlord trait for exploding sixes and +1 to wound, sorry, the relic is just 3 additional attacks, strength +3, -2 damage 2, I think. And then the warlord trait is exploding sixes and +1 to wound. If you put that on a Cadia command squad, they actually deal a lot of melee damage. So
Yes,
I would
I
actually look at
love
that, to be
this.
honest.
I
Not a terrible option.
love that. I love ridiculous relics that are bad, but good in a very specific application.
Yeah. Because you can put
Oh,
4 rerolls to hit on your KD command squad and then fix bayonets. So you can effectively hit on twos with the sergeant, and then you reroll everything for looking for sixes, and you can get like 8 or 9 hits. And then it becomes AP3 there as well. So that's potentially a relic to look into. Look, there's some ways guard can go, but I think the Rogel Dawn is definitely a big winner from the guard, internal codex here,
mhm,
because that's the unit that operates independent of the Finial largely. So that's
mhm.
definitely a big winner here. Sentinels obviously a loser, even though they kept the things. Lehman Russes are a winner there as well. Mortars are a big loser. Earthshaker cannons, surprisingly enough, maybe play a
Still
little one
solid.
of. Depends what your meta is. If your meta is a lot of Marines and stuff, look, take it as a personal anecdote. I was quite impressed with the one unit of 3, but then again, we've got the big L where they can hide. So if you take a very studied look at your terrain, and if you can hide an Earthshaker or 2 Earthshakers, probably minimum, then you can use the strat on them to auto hit, auto wound, then potentially an option as well, guys, because you might not play the mortars because you got no Finial.
Dave, with all of those changes, where do you think Astra Militarum sit here? They're still good enough. Are they really strong?
Yeah, so just take it in context of everything that's happened, I think, over the last couple of months. We've had some big shifts in relation to how good Guard are. Desolation Marines being released is definitely a huge negative for Guard. Can't be seen the other way. But then perhaps the nerf of Codex Warfare is a little bit of a buff. But if we look at the balanced data slate, Guard have gotten nerfed harder than Marines or Iron Hands have. And then but the flip side to that is that Guard have retained their secondaries, which are quite good. So, yeah, all in all, I think Guard have definitely dropped down a little bit from this one. Initially, I thought they got off a little bit light, but if Desolation Marines are still very prevalent, then that's a direct way of attacking your secondaries. So we'll have to see. Maybe the games will play out where Guard can play passive enough to outscore some of these top Desolation Marine armies.
Mhm.
But yeah, my sneaking suspicion is immediately no. And I think also that people will be gravitating towards some of the other sort of guard variants, like the Rogue Dawn, perhaps, which are going to be better independently, however, more susceptible to like Iron Hands, for example.
Yeah, the Rogue Dawn I think sits well in this meta being T9, right? That's
Yeah. And it's just when you shoot on Death It, it's quite good
mm,
because obviously it gets to shoot with 2 turrets, and it's a nice target to put the 4 rerolls to hit on. So when you are shooting on Death, you get 4 rerolls to hit. Kind of
pretty
nice.
tasty.
Yeah.
There's definitely room for one.
Yeah.
Well, that's Guard. I think that's a nice overview of all of that, and we move on to the next one. Halfway down the list now, Dave.
Ooh.
We've got Tau Empire now. I
Oh, your
I
boys.
was so excited to see this, but I've had a lot of time to think about this, and the change here, guys, is that broadside battle suits, these are the kind of heavy support battle suits,
Mm.
gain the core keyword back. And the core keyword allows them to receive a number of different buffs, as well as the
Mm.
reroll reroll hit auras from the commanders. Now, initially, on first look at this, I felt that, oh, amazing, broadsides are back. Broadsides were one of the key elements in the very, very strong Tau lists when they first came out. This was before the indirect fire nerf and before a lot of the points changes that Tau faced. At the moment, broadsides sit at about 100 points per model, and you can take units of up to 3. Now, the particular interaction that makes the broadsides potentially good is in Tau set, which is their main set, where a lot of their named characters sit, including Shadow Sun, who can give them full rerolls to hit, Long Strike, who's in a hammerhead, and he can give a unit the ability to always count as having a marker light, which is +1 to hit.
Sweet.
So you've essentially got this unit that's shooting indirectly with its smart missile systems, which is strength 5, -1, 1 damage, and ignore cover. With full rerolls to hit and basically hitting on 4s. You can also then add extra things. Any 6s to wound is an additional point of AP. Any 6s to hit is an auto wound. Now, there's some problems here. I think this unit is okay, and I think the support is effective, but the overall points cost of it is quite high for this entire combo relative to the actual output that you're actually putting out.
How much is Shadow Sun and Long Strike together?
Oh gosh, it's I think it's like
300.
Yeah, basically, let's put it as about 300. I think it's like 170 plus 130, something like that.
Big support package.
So this is extremely expensive for the actual amount of damage you're going to do. Now, where I think the broadsides having core helps is that their heavy rail rifles actually become more relevant. That long range anti-tank on battle suits rather than hammerheads is definitely going to be more effective, I think. And I would actually not be scared of someone running Tau set broadsides with this full combo and using one of their 2 commander slots on Shadow Sun. I don't think that that's going to be the optimal way or actually push Tau up to the top of the meta. But it'd be very interesting to see. I know we have some good Tau players in the UK who I'm sure will experiment with this and try out a unit.
I think the counterpoint to that is that they sit on a 2-up base save and obviously 1-up in cover, which is a very good profile under Desolation Marines, right?
Yeah.
Can you give them the Feel No Pain as well? Would you play that?
Yeah, you can. I think you probably do run an Ethereal here and give them, you could give them the Feel No Pain. Whether you need to or not, I'm not sure, but the Ethereals are quite effective just for CP regain anyway. It's just a question of whether the broadsides are worth their points investment compared to more dynamic units in the list. But Tau are a little bit short on very good choices at the moment. I think they have nothing that's efficient anymore, and the only really efficient units are their chaffy units like Crew Hounds and things, which now struggle a lot into kind of low strength.
Do you even play?
I just don't think you do. It's a bit tough, which takes a massive strength away from Tau.
Yeah, they had those easy chaff units to go maybe steal an objective. They're super fast. Like Crude and Crude Hounds are actually, like, when you look at the points compared to other units, like at that 6 to 8 point per model, like they actually vastly outshine everything there. But all those models are becoming a lot less prevalent because of one data sheet, right?
Exactly. So, yeah, I mean, Mortar's already removed them, and now we've got the Desolation Marines on top, which removed Mortars. It's quite interesting, isn't it? It's like a cycle.
Yeah, great game. And then you got Night Spinner. Yeah, it's interesting. I think Sunshark Bomber is definitely an interesting option there, but very terrain dependent as well.
I think Sunshark Bombers are excellent. They're still efficient units. The problem is that Tau just can't put much on the board at the moment. So you can end up feeling extremely light on the board, especially if you go second. But yeah.
And actually, like, that dynamic play for Tau was the hugest part of their strength in a long ways, right? Like, players that unlocked that level of dynamic aggressive play were the basically only successful Tau players we saw.
Yeah, exactly. So that's Tau. That's where they sit. And then we've got 4 other factions, which are like small changes. Do you want to... Tiny.
Big changes.
Tiny changes.
Mate, big changes in Camp Tyranid. Oh, baby. Warriors are back on the menu, boys. No, they're not. Fuck, these changes are fucking pathetic, to be honest with you. You can take your adaptative trait again, guys. So you can change that before the game, So, like, your archetype army that you basically build around, you can maybe in 2% of games take something that is maybe better, but is honestly probably not. So I don't think I took anything but +1 to charge in any game I ever played in Tyranids. Now, I know there are some builds like Jormungandr and Kronos that have a better adaptive traits that maybe you could switch something up, but the chances are you're probably playing around one combo anyway. So, yeah, that's pretty pathetic. And then the Hive Tyrant no longer has to be your Warlord. Yay! So you're a really expensive guy that can't overrun because he is core locked now. When he dies, which he will, obviously, because he can't get back to safety, you don't lose all your synaptic imperatives. So hey, that's something. You paid your 220 something point zone throats to get your 5-weapon vulnerable. You can I don't know, get that on turn 3 because I don't know. The guys, these changes basically do nothing, and Tyranids are still in the bad boy corner. However, I haven't been paying attention to any of the 10th spoilers. I don't really know anything about them, but from an outsider's perspective, it looks like there's lots of Tyranidy stuff on there. So are we,
10th edition looks so good, man. All the rules they're releasing, every single article they put out, and I read, I'm like, yes, this seems awesome. So I'm hoping it all comes together. Fingers crossed.
Nice.
I'm sure we'll do an episode about that after Warhammer Fest when we've tried it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, dude. Oh yeah. Maybe we could try Warhammer Fest. But yeah, Tyranids still suck, so don't play them.
Still,
write to your local MP and complain.
I think they are definitely below the midline at the moment. So
that's true. They're definitely below Imperial Knights.
Yeah,
I'll go into T-Suns.
Yeah,
then.
go for it.
Basically, they changed it so obviously Abhor the Witch and Assassinate have to be in the same category, and people were like, "Oh, that's really great for Thousand Suns." No, that doesn't do anything. What are you thinking?
I think it's actually a nerf because I don't
exactly. It's a nerf. It actually is.
Because you want people to take Assassinate when you're playing Thousand Suns, and now they're less likely to. They're going to take
this is a bit of a classic thing where perhaps if you're a bit of a newer player, you would think, oh, they can't stack the thing against one army. But guys, when you put all your eggs in one basket against an army like Thousand Suns, for example, that was actually the easiest way for a Thousand Suns player to win because your opponent has taken 2 secondaries that you could potentially zero on both, and you could just score a super low game of 60 points and win. So actually, potentially a nerf. That's a great way of looking at it.
And to be fair, I'm kind of happy they did this because I think there is play in Thousand Suns, and I think they do work. They're better than their win rate reflects.
Yeah, I said that they were a mid army, right?
Yeah,
and that I think is probably fair. I think.
Yeah, especially this Thousand Suns and Demons thing. Get the cheaper screamers in. I think they're a very fair army.
Yeah. I did actually play a game versus Chris's Iron Hands that was relatively close, albeit my first time playing the army list and everything like that. Thousand Suns one, relatively first, and it was relatively close. So it was nice to see that it definitely does have play there.
Yep.
Certainly good into Desolation Marines maybe.
Absolutely. So
and then we've got
Custodes just got a small change here. I mean, it's small but impactful.
No, this is a big change.
I think so. I think
look, if Tyranids and Thousand Suns were above the Custodes, I think it's Custodes should have been above.
So Custodes have 2 defensive strats. They have a transhuman one, and they have a turn off all your rerolls against them one.
Yep.
And the current very popular builds allowed you to kind of take big units of wardens and stack these on them and make them unkillable. Now you can't use both of those stratagems on the same unit in the same phase, which is fair enough. It probably kills that warden build, but the warden build was potentially struggling as people were pushing more and more into these marine lists.
Yeah, of course. Just come out and shoot in the Desolation Marines and/or a very competent guard player.
I think the Deathwing Terminators did the same thing better, and the Marines were killing them too quickly. So I think Custodes get a little bit of an unfair nerf potentially on this one, but it is what it is.
I'm gonna inject a few things here. We've also got Drakari, which get back the core keyword for Talos and Kronos. I talked to a former teammate
that should have been higher up.
And he was like, yeah, it's all right. I don't think that's going to become a viable active build, certainly because of all the direct level of shooting in the game right now. Effectively, you'll have to walk all of those units into the battlefield once, and then you're probably going to take 15 Desolation Marines to the face, and you're going to see what you got left over after that turn. Do
you know what's amazingly silly about the Desolation Marines is that they crunch both sides of defensive profiles. They kill the really heavy stuff with their direct fire, and they kill the really fragile stuff with their indirect fire, and they narrow the meta into this little area in the middle.
They're basically T-1000 cybernetic organism, like the original Terminator, right? They just kill everything. So look, maybe that's something. I don't think that's going to be a build. I wouldn't be surprised if someone tried to bring 18 of those to GW Fest, though. That might be in a meta-adjacent build that is reasonably popular.
Yeah, I think you might see that, and it could win some games just purely after stat checking you.
Yeah, and then we've got one other army apart from the Ark of the Moment changes. We've got Deathwatch. I think a lot of Deathwatch players have been wanting this change where they get to just actually use their combat doctrine and their chapter. It's called chapter tactic, right? The one where they can
Yeah.
re-roll stuff like that against Xenos. That just seems like something that's way overdue, to be honest. Like, I don't think that needed to be in a balanced data slate. Like,
It should have just been an
you know,
FAQ a while back. Yeah.
yeah. Like, what were you really balancing? Like, you were just making something actually work the way it should have been intended. And then they actually got a secondary, which is good. Marines already have pretty decent secondaries in the standard Adeptus Astartes ones. Shock Tactics being good even at 3 points, but it's at 4 now. But yeah, they got one that looks kind of like on paper an automatically 9, which is
solid,
good. Yeah, and then it's it's basically a 9, guys. If you're under a skilled player that will play it, I'm assuming. And then if you're winning the game heavily, it's a bit of a win more after that.
Nice, yeah. So I think Deathwatch got fixed there. And overall, that is a very interesting data slate, which actually would have been perfect if they had just made a change to Desolation Marines. I think they probably would have hit all the points correctly here.
Yeah. What are the GSC also took a nerf to Brute as well,
but it's not too bad.
I heard Innes Wilson saying that you just pivot to behind enemy lines.
Yeah.
So if Innes is saying that, it's probably true.
Yeah, this is not a bad one for them.
Yeah. So who are the winners, Vic? Who's the after the fights have all digested this. We've had a week to talk about this.
Well, I'm really happy because I think Eldar got away in this one. But then saying that, I think it was very unlikely anything in Eldar would get changed. There's nothing obvious that you can kind of pick out and be like, that's kind of busted. So, yeah, I think it makes sense that Eldar got away with it.
Baharoth?
Oh, yeah, Baharoth should have got nerfed like 3 years ago. I don't know how I don't know. He did get nerfed a little bit. Like both on points and on the rules. Before he used to be able to shoot, jump, charge, jump. So he can't do that anymore, but he's still a ridiculous model that no one likes playing against.
Guys, if you haven't pieced it together, obviously Vic and I in the team, I give Vic shit about Eldar actually being really strong all the time.
Somehow it's become the thing for everyone to come up to me and tell me that, oh, aren't you playing the best army in the game? And it just really annoys me so much. But so yeah, Eldar, I think the fact that other stuff got changed a little bit is good for them. It's a bit sad.
Codex, they were pretty vulnerable to Codex Warfare and Desolation too, right?
I can really build deep into MSU now, which I'm really happy about. You want to pick a faction, Dave, that you think comes out as a big winner?
Oh, man, I don't really think there is one, to be honest.
I would say Iron Hands come out of this.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. I was gonna say that the overall, of course, the ceiling has reduced, the total ceiling cap, and that's kind of breathed more room for armies. But there's one army, of course, that got off a lot lighter than everyone else, which is Iron Hands, because if you just didn't take Codex Warfare, then there's functionally zero difference in Iron Hands now. And Iron Hands are definitely one of those armies that can just wipe you off the board. So they've got that game plan already, which is very strong. And Iron Hands somehow is one of those armies that just has like access to a lot of, fast-ish units that can kind of do things really well, like land speeder tornadoes with assault cannon, like actually in Iron Hands that just hits on 3s, rerolls 1s, even though it's 20 inches across the map, which is like really good. So units like that allow it to just play the secondary game really well anyway. Like with speeders, you could even play behind enemy lines, but like Oath of Moments, Shock Tactics are both really good in it. Then obviously you got banners. You could even do like R&D or something like that. They've got a lot of flexibility, and on top of that, they are probably the most killy army in the whole game right now. So that's a recipe for a tournament-winning list, I would say, right? Space Wolves, maybe, they seem to have gotten good.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think the Desolation Marines are so meta-warping that it really just, it almost feels like, has anything really changed? There's just kind of like been a small tweak here and there, but really we're still having to deal with just Desolation Marines. That's our entire thought process.
Like, can you play Knights into Desolation Marines?
No, there's so many things like that you just like, okay, yeah, I want to play this, but I can't. Desolation Marines. So
yeah. How does it do against Desolation Marines?
Yeah.
Oh, it loses. Yeah. Okay,
so
great.
I think we've still got that. So as far as the balanced data slate goes as an overall, I think we're in a roughly similar spot to where we were before, just with maybe some tweaks below the very top.
Okay, so are we in a better spot than we were last week?
I would say yes, with
Hmm.
like better meta, slightly better meta, and slightly more disappointment. It's kind of like
Okay.
that.
So, in this example, if the old Games Workshop Balanced Data Slate team were to come to you and you were their manager and said, "Here's our proposed changes," is it a passing grade? Like, what are we going with here?
Um, I would say no.
Hmm.
I think you have missed the mark. Realize what the biggest problem is in the meta, correct it so that people have the design space to experiment with new things, and we can sell lots of different models.
Yeah. Hey, that sounds like a fucking business model if I've ever heard one. That's good. I think we'll just cut to some jazz music, and then we're going to be talking about the GW
Yeah.
Fest. All right, everyone, we are back. I'm going to note the time down because we got to cut it. Games Workshop, GW Fest, Warhammer Worldy Tournament in Manchester.
Mhm.
It's at the end of this month. We've had two kind of events this month, but this is a bit of a different doozy, isn't it? The terrain's different. There is no player pack. It's all a bit of a where do we submit our lists? How many people are actually coming up? How many people are attending? Yeah, all questions that we would
So
expect
I have
answered by.
answers, and I want to share answers on this podcast with people because I
What? You have secret
I
information?
have so much secret information because there's like little comments floating around everywhere, and one
That's exactly how I like my information disseminated.
and
Little comments
and I
everywhere.
want to try and accumulate what I know at least, so that the people who are listening have the same information that I do on the
Bad Vic, you should be keeping this within our team so we can hoard this information and use it to our
because
advantage.
it's hugely impactful, this stuff, and I think it could create significant unfair advantages.
Yep.
So first of all, the tournament is 400 players and capped out at 400 sold out.
Oh, didn't know that.
In terms of the terrain pack, my understanding is that layout two, so we're using layout two and three. Layout two is the better out of the two. Layout three is the one that they've used to replace their old layout one. Layout 3 is only going to be used for Dawn of War and Hammer of Anvil missions, and likely only for day one. And someone has kind
What?
of confirmed that it's going to be used for day one. But I don't
Okay.
know if that's actually accurate or not. Day 2 will be layout 2, and so will day 3. And those will be the corners missions and the quarters missions. Uh, which
What?
No, does that not sound right?
So we don't play. I don't know, man. I don't, you're the one telling that. I'm just reacting.
uh,
So we get no Dawn of War missions on day 2 and 3.
I think you can. I think that's correct, but I think you could
Okay.
play a Dawn of War mission on layout two. But it looks a bit janky to do that, to be honest.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
okay, I think that's the way it goes. And what was the next point, Dave? There are a few other
I
things.
don't know. You're the
Oh,
one leading. I don't. I
okay.
don't know anything, but I don't
So,
know what you're gonna
guys, we
say.
haven't had any GW terrain events here.
Mm,
So, the way the terrain works, right? We're used to kind of pre measuring where all the terrain needs to go following a tournament pack.
yeah.
In this case, the Perspex squares, there's no measurements. They roughly place them at the start of the day in a particular place on the board that looks like the picture.
What?
So there can be some variability in the distance between ruins and where everything is. Someone mentioned it that the two ruins that run across the middle, they're obscuring. You can either have a massive wide open firing lane through the middle or a very narrow one which is barely existent.
What?
It kind of roughly floats around 24 inches between the ruins, but it could be 22, it could be 27, so keep that in mind.
The fuck?
Inside of the Perspex squares, there'll be ruined walls, which are solid on the front facing and a little bit broken down towards the side. And those are good terrain to hide infantry models behind. But there's a variability in it that some of them can be 5 inches tall and some of them can be 3 inches tall. And if it's 3 inches, there are
Okay.
a lot of vehicles and things which will stick out above it. So if you're touching the terrain, you can be shot.
Mm,
And it's completely pot luck depending on what you actually get placed on.
nice.
Now, I think the reason for all of this is to make sure that people can't specifically prepare for a particular tournament terrain set, which will be popular for some people and unpopular for some other people.
Because why would you want to do that?
But in my opinion, reducing the variability of losing because of the terrain is pretty sad. And realistically, you can't completely map something out just by knowing measurements of everything. All it does is allow you not to be caught out by surprise. That's my take on it. America is different to the UK on that one. Whatever.
It's like turning up to the 100-meter sprint, and turns out that like there's a big muddy patch right through the middle,
just on your lane.
Like, yeah. So, by the way, guys, completely unscripted. I didn't know what Vic was going to say then. Of course, I knew some of these things, like, what the ruins kind of look like and stuff. But what I heard from what you just said, Vic, is that if you get to your table really early, you just move the ruins wherever the fuck you want, and then just say that's what it was like.
So I think that's technically cheating, but also something that may happen, which is pretty sad, to be honest. Because
I mean, that's a okay, right. I don't think you should do that if you're the listener, but there is no way of enforcing whether or not someone has or has not done that, right?
Yeah, because the variability between being 25 inches away and 22 inches is so huge and impactful for the outcome of games.
But what about this one you were saying? There's a ruin in the middle or something, right? Like, you just got the open one, mate.
If it's just a little bit closed up, you can stage your entire army behind it. If it's just a little bit open, your whole army gets shot on the approach turn. So these are massive. And the thing is, without measurements, if the terrain gets nudged between rounds, you have no way, unless you call a judge, of actually correcting the position of the ruins.
Right. I've also read that there's no clock policy, so you can't actually play on a clock.
Oh, you're not allowed to?
No. That's what I've read. Like, someone correct me, but I'm just gonna give a big. You think after 2 years of just solid UK tournaments, like, we could have just addressed some of these things. Like, come on, guys! Like, you make the game. Like, there's no excuses to having awful stuff like this, where it's like, come on, just give us some measurements. I mean, it's not that hard. It takes 5 minutes and a tape measure, which if you work at Games Workshop, you will probably have access to. You don't need to go to B&Q or whatever to buy your tape measure. You just go down there and you measure it, and you're like, oh, by the way, guys, it's 5 inches up and 6 inches down. There you go. Like, dude, is this how the United States operates at some of their tournaments?
So what I would say, Dave, to take a more measured approach to this, is that I think this event is more than just the tournament, but the tournament is very important for the players who are attending, and we're all taking this very seriously. I think we should give this a chance, go in with a positive mindset that we're going to make the most of the terrain that we have. The bit that troubles me is the fact that the information is not readily available. So a lot of people, like, everyone's going to get caught up by surprise. And the thing is, if you can ask the questions and get the information, you have an advantage. Because I know now I'm not going to run my Razier because he is 3.5 inches tall.
Yeah.
So I'm just not going to run him because there's going to be some game I lose randomly because my Razier dies. Now, that's like fine. That means, you've got to run a tactically flexible list. But it's,
it's not fine because only some people know. And this is the exact same thing that we had happen at LVO as well, was that there was huge terrain changes the day of the tournament. And we're not saying anyone knew, but if you did know that, for example, you would be at an enormous advantage. Like, no way of looking at it any other way. So it's a little bit of a shame that maybe Games Workshop haven't tried to put their best foot forward on this tournament.
I mean, it's fine. They can be variable terrain. And just tell people, just put it in a player pack somewhere, just so that we can read it and be like, oh, fair enough. We can't prepare for this. The terrain can be all over the place.
Which is it's a little bit of a shame because obviously, we've got UKTC here, which has set the bar at a very high standard.
And I think that may be because, look, ultimately, I want the GW tournament to massively succeed here and create a long-standing circuit in the UK, which is highly successful. What would be a disaster is if this flops because competitive players are like, look, it's not really that competitive an event, and then the attendance just drops off. Of course, the first tournament is going to be hugely oversubscribed. Everyone's going to want to go there, but that's not you need to create a recipe for long-term success, like the UKTC have managed to do over time. And hopefully it A, works out, and B, if it doesn't work out this time and there is criticism, they actually listen to it rather than just use their reasoning and excuses.
And it's all good maybe to make some mistakes the first time around. Although it's not the first time around they've been doing the circuit in the United States, but maybe their audience is a bit more receptive to this. But I hope that perhaps the TO is there and is really open to taking some criticism on board, or not criticism, but constructive feedback on board, because it's hugely important. Like every single person, Vic and I have been more than invested in seeing the UKTC succeed, for example. And we've always offered our constructive feedback on how to make it a best event, because at the end of the day, we just want to see it succeed because it benefits us inherently, right? So hopefully Games Workshop operate like that. I do actually kind of like the fact that that there might be another big tournament scene with different terrain.
Yeah, I love it.
Maybe that's a hot take, but I think that would be really cool. Someone could point at UK and say it's a little bit monodimensional with our terrain, right? Given that it's one big terrain set.
Absolutely.
Anyway, that's us for the day, guys.
Yeah.
The reason I'm saying that is because Vic has just dropped off and he'll be rejoining in a second. But I'm going to sign out.
Yes.
This has been episode 20 of the 40K Fireside podcast. Vic has rejoined in our studio as we have some technical issues. But Vic, I've just signed off.
Have you?
You've done
I just want to say, last little bit, just about Warhammer Fest, that I am not making my judgment just yet. I'm going to really give it a chance, and I'm very, very excited to see everyone and kind of be there and do that tournament. There is a chance, Dave, that this event could be perfect, and we're really, really happy. Let's come back.
Well, that would require me to win, so there's a chance.
I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. We talked about loads of stuff. I think this is an interesting one, and we will see you next time by the Fireside.
See you on the flip side. We'll probably see you at GW Fest. So if you're at GW Fest, just come and tell us, hey, you like the podcast. We had that quite a bit recently, and we obviously really appreciate the feedback. What keeps us going and stuff like that. So if you'd like to see some stuff on the podcast, then just tell us in real life, and we'll cover something. That's episode 20. Hope you've enjoyed it, the Fireside. 20 episodes. I'm going to have a drink to that tonight. What about you, Vic?
20 episodes, man. That's a milestone. I love it.
20 big ones. There we go.
Amazing.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you for listening to the 40K Fireside podcast. Vic and I hope you've enjoyed listening, and we greatly appreciate any feedback that you can provide after the show.